So, as we're about midway through our last full day of the retreat, there's been a lot of beautiful teachings. I feel quite privileged to have been around all of the Ajahns who have been offering these beautiful words of Dhamma, and how special it is to just be able to sit and reflect on them, allow them to penetrate the mind and do their work as we do our work. So it's I think the many of the layers and unfolding of working with anapanasati and joy, and many of the themes that have come up have been quite useful, at least from my sense, and it's been quite nice just being on the Thanksgiving retreat, offering it. And I think, unlike Ajahn Yaniko, I had been on a couple of Thanksgiving retreats in my earlier years. I think as maybe I was a 1 Vasa monk or 2 Vasa monk. So I've been reflecting on what the sort of the things in regard to the themes we've heard. You know, what we're really taking away from this experience for the last week, what usefulness it has been. I can say for myself, there's been particular times that these teachings come to mind, and oh yeah, that's right, and they're reaffirming, but they also offer a new way of looking at something, a new way of looking at the Dhamma. And as Lumpur explained, he's offered a lot of teachings over the years on anapanasati, and that's been quite useful. Because it might seem like, what is there really to breathing in and out? It just seems like this simple thing that we do all day long, and perhaps for most people there's, made much of something that's so plain and ordinary. I think it was Ajahn Jeff, I heard, who was quoting Stephen Colbert, who said something like, Buddhism, you wrap yourself up in a bedsheet, sit underneath a tree and breathe. I don't get it. But as what Ajahn Jeff pointed to, it's actually true, what he said. But it's how we breathe and what we do with that quality of our own attention, our awareness, that can transform our hearts and leads us to the path of non-suffering. And so this breath can be very subtle. It can be something that has been pointed out throughout the week as an area of deep practice, a place we can lend our mind in many different directions to keep this steady awareness so that we can allow wisdom to arise. And it's very easy. It's very easy to fall back to our usual ways of being, if old habits, old ways of of being with our experience. So one of the things that I've been working on, and a theme that I've continued to come back to, is this sense of a search for something. And I like the word that Ajahn Kurundamo used during his Dhamma talk. He said that the mind is seeking acquisition, and that can be our intention a lot of the time. We are often trying to get something. And so this is the second noble truth that the Buddha was talking about. It's the suffering that we experience is directly proportional to the amount of getting that we try to have, the desire that we have, the movement of the mind towards acquisition, unwholesome desire, selfishness, greed. And it's very subtle. It's occurring so often that it's easy to miss. It's easy to not have it appear as something that's actually causing us a problem. So, like, there was a question to Ajahn Sudhiro yesterday about a woodpecker, and I'm not sure how many of you have experienced this through the mics that we have set up here, but it seems like a persistent woodpecker has been making him or herself known at very opportune moments. So sit down and it's very quiet and there's no noise, and Abhayagiri is so nice. And that would be a subtle sound. It's more like sounds like a high-pitched sledgehammer right to the left of Ajahn Yaniko's ear, his left ear, and my right ear. And it's interesting watching that experience. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, how unpleasant it is, and whose turn is it, or who's going to get up and scare this bird away that's causing a nuisance. But the mind starts to move in that direction. Like there's something wrong with this experience. I can't concentrate. I can't be with this moment until there's quiet again. There's peace. And so this woodpecker can be the example of anything, some kind of person who you have difficulty with, or some niggling thought that won't go away. It can be really anything. And the mind can become quite obsessed with this, if only I don't have to hear this bird. And even in that, who knows? This is just a perception. I mean, it could be just one of the Abhayagiri monastics happens to want to put some nails in a wall. I mean, I don't know that it's a woodpecker. And then he or she just disappears whenever we go around the corner and a bird appears, and yeah, it's that woodpecker. So we have all kinds of perceptions going on. What it is, what's the sound, who's making it, why they're making it. It's this deranged woodpecker, something wrong with it. It hates me. So that becomes the experience of the mind. What I noticed through this is when I was getting caught in the sound to the degree of aversion, then invariably the bird would go away and somebody would chase it away or whatever. And then, what bliss, that quiet again. Now I can focus the mind. And tomorrow, or the next day, I think it is, my sister's arriving, and then I have to prepare for this trip, and I'm going to be gone for a month, going to Massachusetts, and what's that, pecking again? I can't concentrate with that pecking. So we keep thinking that it's the problem is in this condition, our sensual experience, or whatever it might be. It always has to be pleasant. When it's pleasant, then we think, that's how it should be, and then our minds go off again into some sort of planning or becoming. As I mentioned, the third nutriment is this, volitional action, volitional thought, sense of like what I am, who I'll be, what I'm going to do, my plans, or what I don't want to do, and we get caught in that so easily. So what's interesting is that it's, when there's kind of the most peaceful experiences we want, it doesn't matter. We still can move towards distraction. And then we have aversive experiences and we think that's a problem. I can't practice, I can't do this, I can't be with these people, I can't live in this community. If only this person wasn't here. If only this monastery didn't have woodpeckers. And on the mind goes. But then when we turn our attention towards that in our own experience that we don't want to experience, and we begin to investigate and look at that, then we see, oh, okay, I have the potential to actually look into the unpleasant and investigate that, try to understand it, and then the mind can actually come to peace. Even with something that's so, annoying as a woodpecker hitting a wall. It's actually slightly painful to the eardrum. And for those of us who've even been practicing for years, this doesn't always come obviously, that it's not about seeking pleasant experience. It's about our willingness to learn from experience. So sometimes people think about meditation as therapy. This is a therapeutic end. I'm going to heal myself. I'm going to feel better about who I am. I'm going to feel good. And that's the difference, is that the Buddha said, no, it's not about your sort of pleasant feeling. That can be part of it. It's about nibbana, it's about liberation. It's about freeing oneself from dukkha, from suffering. And as Ajahn Sudhiro pointed out, he said, it's very difficult, this practice. And so many times, I underestimate that. And we can underestimate that. And he pointed out that's very true. You begin the practice and you don't know how difficult it's going to be. So then the thought might be, well, why practice then if it's painful, difficult? You have to look at things you don't want to look at. And it's because on the other side of it is, as Ajahn Sudhiro said again, was that there's less suffering. When we do pay attention, we're willing to look at what we don't want to look at. And especially when we really understand the Buddha's teaching on desire as the cause of suffering, then we see that fundamentally what we're trying to do is to get an experience all the time. We're seeking to get something other than what we have. Because once we get it, we often want something more. We're not satisfied. If the meditation was just the best, most amazing meditation, then I have to get it again, or maybe there's something even more than that I can get. And we put obstructions then in our path. So I think that's a very important aspect of practice, looking at what we're trying to get, what we're trying to acquire. So I can ask of you now, during this retreat, you came to this retreat, was there anything you were possibly aware of that you wanted to get? What did you want? Or was it that on the opposite side, that's exactly the same as getting, you didn't want? I don't want this to happen. I don't want that to happen. That's still wanting. It's the same thing. And we see that through the practice, that as often as this is coming up, this sense of getting something, it's very hard to work with, because it's so natural for us to want to acquire. And this is why it's the second noble truth. It's the truth of existence. It's sort of like we're just naturally bound towards acquisition. It can be acquisition of, just like I said with the nutriments, just edible food, acquisition of sense experience. becoming. What am I going to do next? What's happening tomorrow? The retreat's going to end. But the nice aspect, or the beautiful aspect about this, is that we don't have to get caught up in that when we begin to look at it. But we have to also be aware of the subtlety of it, the subtlety of our trying to often get something. That intention that comes up in the mind it just saturates our experience often. And we look at also that, as I was mentioning, that experience of like, I don't want to experience this. I don't want to experience a woodpecker, hitting the wall. So it's pretty simple. It's understandable. In the Buddhist time, there was unfortunately a monk who went too far with this, and he got a bit annoyed with the birds around his where he was living. And he didn't quite understand the Buddhist teaching, so I think he went out and he killed them. And the Buddha said, "No, you misunderstand. Those are not my teachings." So we have to really look at like, what is the experiences we're having that we're trying to kill, we're trying to annihilate, we're trying to get rid of, and those other experiences we're trying to get. And it's a constant. I find in my own practice, in my own experience, it's just pushing and pulling against us all the time. I'd rather be doing something else, or being somebody else, or whatever it might be. Or I wish it was more like this, or I had more of this, more of whatever, just more. And we don't have to beat ourselves up about that intention. It's just we're born with it. It comes from, from our own evolution, from our own evolutionary past. It comes from we're born with these intentions, and they're very normal. There's nothing personal about it. Each one of us has this sense of desire that comes up. So the purpose of our practice is to examine this and to see how is it possible then, knowing that we have these desires, to approach our experience without acquisition. And this is a very difficult aspect, because just coming to sit down in meditation, coming to this Dhamma talk, there can be a sense, whatever it is that you're doing, even if it's a wholesome aim, doing something like meditation, it's often going to be mixed with different types of kamma, so wholesome and unwholesome. The desire to meditate is a wholesome thing, but then we add an acquisition. When is my mind going to get peaceful? When will I finally penetrate the first jhana? Or, as many of you might be aware if you've been practicing a while, there was that one time I was meditating. It was just incredible bliss. The experience was so amazing, and I've just been spending the last couple of decades trying to get back to that one experience. And unfortunately, with that very sense in mind, it's impossible, because the very getting of something prevents it from reoccurring. And so we're a bit in a conundrum. We know that we need to practice with desire, but as Ajahn Yanako was pointing out, there's this Cunda, this sense of drive or interest, and the word can also be used as desire, but it can be more in a wholesome range. So then we have to figure out, what does that mean? What does that really look like when we have wholesome desires? So I can ask you, what is a wholesome desire? A lot of the things that we've been talking about on this retreat, even the sense of bringing gladness and joy, pamoja, into our practice can be wholesome. We can see that there's a need to assist somebody just in a moment. And all of a sudden our own desire to help ourselves, our own desire to do something only in the realm of our own needs drops away, and we move in the direction of caring for another person. And without thinking about it, that can occur. That's a wholesome that's a wholesome direction of mind. So that can be that motivation, that Cunda that comes up. And so in our meditation practice, we're wanting to often bring that to mind, to bring that up, so that we're clearly understanding, even on very subtle levels, when we're trying to get something, And it's hard to see. It's hard to see when you sit down in meditation every day, and you might notice just this sense of coming into it with a motivation of, I hope this is going to be a good meditation, and I better get this or that. I don't want to fall asleep. I don't want to be prey to this hindrance or that hindrance. Sometimes we come at it in a very strong way, like a fist kind of clenched up, and the mind just can't let go. It just spins around and around and around. And we're wondering what is going on with this meditation, and we get tighter and tighter until we just then feel this is a failure. This is a failure. But then sometimes, as also Ajahn was pointing out, we just can completely let go, and in that letting go, then the mind, it stops this sense of acquisition is also let go of. And so we need to tie that in quite often with our practice if we can. See how we're holding on to something, what it is we're wanting, a particular experience that we're wanting, or we're not wanting to have. And that means that for the most part we're changing our mind towards learning. And, being in the American school system for 14, 15 years, and then there's university. I think most people who've experienced some form of institutional education know that there can be something good that comes out of it, but it can be quite painful, the process of learning. So it's not again about just getting pleasant experiences. And it's also, as the Buddha pointed out, it's not to inflict pain on ourselves either. It's not to torture ourselves. But when we put learning as the importance of what it is we're doing with our interest in the Buddha's teachings, then it changes our motivation quite a bit, and we can begin to let go of that sense of acquisition. And again, we can move into more acquisition with learning. So that's another danger that one needs to be careful of. The acquisition of, I'm going to get all these Pali words down, I'll get all of the Buddha's phrases, all of his lists, I'll memorize my favorite Anguttara Nikaya quotes, and on it goes. So acquiring takes many forms, even in learning. But we look to this each time, and so if we're examining that, rather than going with can I get a more pleasant experience where there's no woodpecker hitting the wall, I think it's more, can I learn from what is occurring for me right now? What can I see? What can I understand? How can I understand it? So this is where a pithy saying like Lumpur Sumedho's statement, it's like this. Why is that so powerful of a statement? I remember recently when Lumpur Sumedho was here, they asked him, like, what does that mean? And he said to them, like, well, it means it's like this. And they said, like what? And he said, exactly. And it's so simple, but we often just miss it. We miss the deeper meaning that we're always trying to make it. We're always trying to make it not like this. So, we have these, this. Sometimes distractions can occur. Something can throw the mind off, and then it's like, oh, why does it have to be like that? Well, because it's like this. So there's no argument there. We just subtly cut through the mind. There's no other way it could be. But yet, the suffering that the Buddha is continually talking about is that our minds are consistently inclining towards, it's not like this, it's not like this, it can't be like this, I want it to be another way. And this is the mental dukkha that the Buddha spoke about time and time again. And so the more that we move towards that intention of learning, of understanding, accepting that exactly it's just like this, there's no other way it could be, then we start to let go of that getting mind, the mind of acquisition that is so common and so second nature that it's very hard to see. So I can ask you just right now, what is it that's coming up in your own mind? Is there a acquisition? Is there something you want? Do you want more of an exciting Dhamma talk? Or do you want to have a mind that's not as cloudy right now, perhaps not falling asleep? That's still trying to get something. So as I work with this, I just see it more and more in my own practice as something that can be truly liberating if I'm aware of it, because the sense of acquisition, it doesn't like go away just becoming a monk or coming into a monastery. It doesn't. In fact, it can be just much more highlighted and difficult to work with, I find, because there's not as many distractions there, and you have your friends to kind of point out, hey, you might be missing this, or other ways that you have to deal with, views and opinions that might arise. And you have to confront them all the time. That's why living in community, Ajahn Chah had such an emphasis on this, because it wasn't a sense of torturing that he was trying to create, but it was to lend one's mind more easily to learning, because when you're living with others, there's bound to be conflict. And when you're living with an increased number of others, then those conflicts can also increase. And so part of our learning is how to deal with complexity within social situations, but not have the mind lose its base of equanimity and awareness. And also to learn to let go, so that things aren't so, don't take up so much importance. They're not the thoughts and the views that we have. We're willing to drop them or let go of them because they're painful a lot of the time. I was just reminded of this with a talk I gave. Ajahn Yaniko had reminded me about it, and it was pretty funny. It didn't seem funny to me, but there was, I've mentioned this many times, but one of my interests became like having a nice garden here in the monastery. So we have these kind of greens, and there's another monk who I work with around this. But I could get kind of obsessed about this type of thing or a tree or whatever it would be. And so we were given a beautiful olive tree by one of our supporters. And, that seemed, and other trees as well. And that seemed good enough until another supporter said, "Oh, I have a bunch of olive trees, and I'll just give them to you for free. They're not in great shape. They're kind of in pots that they've been abandoned for a while, and nobody's taking care of them. They're maybe 10, 12 years old. Turns out they're 20 years old. But it was suggested that maybe that's not a good idea. It's enough for now. But I couldn't let go of that until I reflected on it and gave a Dhamma talk about it, and I was like, "Yep, okay." But then the desire came up again. I said, No, it still would be good to have these trees. We've got to get these trees. They're free, they're being offered. What could go wrong? What could go bad? So then Ajahn one day decided to surprise me, and he said, "All right." Well, he told another monk that we could accept those trees, and so we got them, and lo and behold, I think the Dhamma talk was called Trees of Peace or Trees of Agony, and you can definitely say they're trees of agony. And that's how it is, we don't plan for our acquisitions to be things that are going to be difficult or painful for us. We plan for them to be satisfactory. That's how they have to be. This wonderful new car I'm going to get is just going to be perfect. There's going to be nothing wrong with it. And then it gets one scratch, and we're devastated. I think within a week of getting these trees, a buck came down and kind of tore into one of them. Other deer walked by and nibble at them, and I have to chase them away. So it's just like, that's not what was supposed to happen. An olive tree is a tree of peace. And of course, then once you get what you want, you're not really interested in it after you get it. So there's also that loss of interest as well. And it's like when the woodpeckers stop pecking. You get what you want, and then the mind just goes back into its old habits. It turns out that when we lose that, when we get or we lose the thing that we don't want, it goes away. We're still in pain. We still have these difficult experiences. And these are just great lessons again. If there's a willingness to learn, if I can see learning involved, and the way that wisdom arises is then it's like, oh, the same kind of situation comes up, and I can say, oh, that didn't work out last time. I need to pay attention to that. And it doesn't mean that there's an automatic dropping of that desire. It doesn't mean that we just stop desiring, we stop wanting a particular experience. It means that we see, okay, this didn't quite work out. Come on, don't do this again. Try not to get into this again. And we keep reminding ourselves of that over and over until wisdom begins to arise naturally. Then this is what true wisdom is. This panya is there. It meets the defilements. So when we clearly see that an unwholesome desire has occurred in the mind, then panya, wisdom, meets that, and immediately the mind can drop it. It can let go, because all of the wholesome qualities of letting go arise at once to meet that. And that's where our learning around mindfulness and awareness is so important, because when we're paying attention, when we're able to see things clearly, then our mind meets those objects, and we're holding that in mind. What is the correct way to see this? What's the correct way to hold it? We sit down in meditation and we ask ourselves, what am I trying to get here? And we can identify that because we're willing to learn, but we're also willing to look. It's just not something pleasant that I need to aim for. And it's okay, of course, for that to be acknowledged in the mind. I mean, it's just almost impossible to not have a pleasure-seeking mind. To not at least see that that is there. But we're making choices all the time. What's wise for us? What's the best thing for us to do? And so, this is a part of our meditation that I think is harder to see sometimes. It seems quite obvious, but it's hard to actually sometimes be honest with ourselves, because desires can be so strong. Our habits can be so strong that we just can't let go of them. And that's and sometimes that causes problems with our social relations. Sometimes it causes problems with our own integrity. We can try to be following what we know is a moral direction for ourselves that's good, and then we can just lose that. We can unfortunately lose that train and go off in the wrong direction, because we're not seeing clearly with wisdom the correct approach, and how much these desires can overwhelm us sometimes. So we have a chance to be truly honest with ourselves, to really look at that sense of those things, aspects of ourself, those aspects of our inclinations of our mind that we don't want to look at. And one of the important aspects is to not take it personally. So it's, oh, this is me and my stuff. It's so terrible. I'm so bad at this, and I have all these really bad ways of just being, of living. And then we get into wishing we were another person, wishing we were different, wishing we like we're not good enough, we're not strong enough, we can't actually do this practice, we can't do these things, and then we set ourselves up for failure, because we create, we have a sankhara of failure, a belief or a creation of who and what and how we are, and then we keep that in mind, and that's unfortunate. That would be wrong mindfulness, for example. Keeping an unwholesome object in mind. So there's always this sense of being very careful around our own minds and our own motivations, and trying to be honest. And one of the aspects that's difficult is to keep this honesty going, because it's hard to be a person of integrity. It's hard to be a person who is quite honest with ourselves, to kind of deal with and face in a courageous way those things that we'd rather not admit about ourselves. And that can come up, like I was talking about community, and that can come up in community when people bring up some feedback, something about oneself. It's one of the beautiful aspects of being a monastic. The Buddha not only encouraged this mutual feedback, that you're essentially living as a mirror and living with other mirrors, so the reflections of who you are, and but you're also encouraging that in others, so they're not afraid to offer you feedback, say, hey, maybe the direction you're going in isn't quite right. But the Buddha also went further, and he said, you need to also kind of look at that. You have to really, be quite honest and careful about a suggestion, because he said that's a gem. It might not be something you want. You might really feel defensive and want to put up your armor and defend against that. But unfortunately, that's just creating a self and creating more dukkha. So he said it's our duty to really explore, is that good advice from someone else? Is that helpful for us to hear? And Ajahn Chah had this wise saying. He said, well, maybe it's not. Maybe what somebody said isn't true, but how can you know it unless you actually examine it yourself? I think his saying was, if somebody calls you a dog, turn around and see if you have a tail. And if you don't, then what's the problem? the person was wrong. And the irony about that is, even if someone's wrong, we get really upset about it. It's a bit strange. You think about it, like, well, if they're wrong, they're wrong. Like, why does it need to be a personal thing when we know something like that is incorrect? So, when we're turning our life towards learning and being open to that, then we're also turning it towards what can sometimes be unpleasant for ourselves, and in the end, that's a lot of what the teaching on the dukkha that leads to the end of dukkha, or as Ajahn Sudhira was talking about, the difficulty that leads to less difficulty. But most of us, that's hard to hear. It's a hard pill to swallow, because we want this practice to be easy. We want we want to have our cake and eat it too. We kind of want to get the results, as Ajahn Yanaka was pointing out with a question to the Dalai Lama. It should be quick, it should be fast, it should be easy, efficient, it should be cheap. But it's not. That's not what the Buddha said. He said it'd be easier to conquer the entire world than to conquer one's own mind. And so we have this opportunity when we go on retreats like this to explore our own interest and availability to learning. We have the opportunity to really look quite subtly at how we're causing ourselves our own problems. And we could try to explore this, and I'm trying to encourage this in this talk, is just to ask yourself in a mantra, similarly to how Lumpur Sumedho was teaching when he says it's like this. Like, what am I trying to get right now? What am I trying to acquire? What is it that I'm not satisfied with, that I want to be different? And then ask yourself, well, if that thing that I don't want, or the thing that I want to get, is true, if that's very present for me, then how can I learn from that desire? How can I learn from that acquisition? And it's as simple as, this tapping at the wall. We can say, okay, it is annoying. There's no point in lying to ourselves that a very loud noise hitting our eardrum, that can be painful. But then when we switch towards a mind of learning, then the mental anguish diminishes to such a degree that we have the space for peace, even in the midst of something like physical pain. And then we tend to blame our circumstances a lot less, the conditions in our life that should be better or have to be better. And we have a willingness to be present with whatever adversity there is. And so then we stop trying to run away. And so that's really what's meant by right effort as well. We're willing to look at those unwholesome aspects in our mind and be honest with them, and invite them to diminish, and invite the wholesome aspects in. And we just keep learning more and more on a subtle level how that's done. And as was also mentioned, it was with Ajahn Yanaka talking about patience. We do that with great patience over an entire lifetime. And we also might have the thought that it might, might not just all come together in this one lifetime. And but perhaps we can pat ourselves on the back for having some good karma by encountering the Dhamma in this lifetime, and know that potentially there was some goodness that allowed that to be from our past lives as well. So I want to just end this talk with saying anumodana for everyone's effort and intention to do what is difficult to do, and encouragement towards that sense of learning and understanding and gaining in wisdom, but not necessarily getting it, not trying to acquire it. And also just to know that even though we say the practice is difficult, there still can be that pamoja, that gladness and joy that can arise in doing what needs to be done. You want